Reports coming out of Spain suggest Alexander Isak's price has been set. Kai Havertz undergoes surgery on the hamstring injury that will rule him out for the rest of the season. The Arsenal women thrash Spurs in the North London derby and will round up the biggest talking points from another weekend of Premier League action. All of that and more to come on today's episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to the pod. How are you? Happy Monday. Hope you've all had a wonderful weekend. It was a weekend that had the potential to be quite a frustrating one. But of course, Arsenal in the end managed to get over the line against Leicester City, courtesy of our makeshift centre forward, Mikel Merino. Wow. We talked a lot, didn't we, in the build-up of the game about what the options were, what Mikel Arteta might do, how he might approach it, how he might face up to this particular challenge. And, I think we were all quite confident that it was going to be Leandro Trossard from the start. That it was, but we managed to get Mikel Merino off the bench and have him really impact the game in, I guess, the best possible way, not just because of what it did for Arsenal in the immediate term, i.e. getting them all 3 points, but because of what it does in terms of breeds confidence, I think, through the group, that even during a difficult period with a lot of key players missing, they're still going to be all right. They've still got it within them as a group and as a club to be able to kind of, to pull on those reserves, to get people adapting and changing and sort of, adjusting their game so that they can be of some use. So, look, it couldn't have gone any better in that sense, in terms of giving people that bit of belief that maybe they needed around Mikel Merino and around what our squad has to offer. The performance overall was dreadful, and we discussed that at length on the pod that we put out on Sunday morning. So if you want to go back and check it out, it is the last full episode on the channel, and it is the last episode in your podcast feed. We have dropped a couple of clips from that episode as videos on the YouTube channel, so make sure that you go onto the playlist of match reviews, and that way you will find it. Okay, then, shall we get into today's topics? Let's start off by discussing the Arsenal women. They thrashed Spurs by 5-0. An own goal from Hunt saw the Gunners take the lead, and that was followed on by goals from Caldente, Marnham, Russo, and Fox. Just under 57,000 people in attendance, which really is great to see. We're 10 points off the top in terms of the WSL, but always nice to get a victory over that lot. And look, I think for a long time, it's been really clear that the women's game is growing. Arsenal have been at the forefront of that as a football club for such a long time. I don't think there's any other club in the country that would get those types of crowds as consistently as we do. And so, we are definitely, hands down, the best supported team in the WSL. And it's just really amazing that as a football club, we've been able to kind of make sure that we resource that department, if you like, the women's football department, enough. Because I look at a lot of other big football clubs, really huge football clubs that have the fan bases to potentially get crowds like this. If a proportion of their men's support, for instance, were to then start attending the women's games and offer the same level of support. You look at Manchester United, you look at Liverpool, two huge football clubs. Even Tottenham Hotspur are a big football club in terms of the number of supporters and volume of supporters, but nobody does it like we do it. Nobody can turn out sort of 50,000 plus crowds most times that their women's team is playing at the men's stadium. So fantastic to see, and great to see Arsenal at the forefront of that. If you're a Spurs fan, bloody hell, it's miserable. Not just on the men's side of things, but on the women's side of things as well. And that must be, well, I was going to say it must be difficult to deal with, but I suppose if you've grown up as a Spurs fan, you're probably used to it by now. It's probably the norm, right? Anyway, let's move on and let's talk Kai Havertz. He has, of course, undergone successful surgery on the hamstring tear that will see him miss the rest of the season. Mikel Arteta said in the lead up to our game at the weekend that it was an accident waiting to happen. Can you make the argument that we could have managed him and maybe certain other players somewhat more effectively? I think you can. And I've been quite frustrated by the fact that we haven't. And that has, in my opinion, played some part in the sort of severity of the injuries that Saka suffered, that Havertz has suffered. In particular, those two have played so much football in recent times. But over the weekend, when I was kind of looking through the other games and sort of reading previews and listening to sort of build up on the radio as I was sort of traveling and all the rest of it, I'm not going to say that it sort of suddenly slapped me in the face, because I've been aware of it already, but it just kind of dawned on me when I was thinking about sort of some of Mikel Arteta's comments, accident waiting to happen, talking about the load on the players, talking about them not having adequate time to recover, et cetera, et cetera. And it dawned on me that actually this is a league-wide problem, man. Like, this is a league-wide problem. And yes, if we want to look specifically at the cases of some of our players, and if we want to focus in on that, I think we can ask questions of the way some of our key players and stars have been managed. I don't think that's unfair, okay? But I do think that when you zoom out, you can clearly see that this is a league-wide problem. And the number of injuries in general across the Premier League is quite simply getting out of hand. And it all comes down to a lack of recovery time between matches. Seeing as some basic research tells us that you need longer than 24, sometimes 36 hours to recover from a game. And we've got a Club World Cup in the summer as well. Of course, Arsenal aren't participating in that, thankfully. What the hell is the need for that? It's all about money. It's all about greed. But what these people at the top of the football pyramid, the powers that be, fail to understand is that the more football there is, the more saturated it becomes. The more saturated it becomes, the less interest I think people start to have in some of the sort of lower regarded competitions. I mean, I know some Spurs fans that are looking at this season and are going Europa League games against a nothing club. I'm not even going to bother watching that. Now, I'm not saying that's how you support your team. I don't think I could ever stay away purposely if Arsenal were in action in any competition. But it just goes to show that the oversaturation of football is a problem. I've got friends that say to me, and I often do this as well, I often say it to my wife, and she says, "What? I never thought I'd hear you say that ever in your life." Sometimes I say, I need a night off from football. Like tonight, right? Like tonight, there's a really good game at the top of the Championship between Leeds and Sunderland. Barcelona are in action on ITV4. Now, under different circumstances, those games might attract me, at least one of them. I might sit down and watch it. But given that the weekend's been so football heavy, and all of the months that have gone before that, where we've just been watching game after game after game, where every single night it feels like there's a game to try and keep across, I've got to the point where sometimes I want to break from football. And the oversaturation of football is causing this. If you'd have asked 25, 26, 27-year-old Harry Symeou, do you want to take a night off from watching football? I'd have said, are you mad? What is there better to watch than this? And now I'm at the point where sometimes I do need these nights and these days, and sometimes even weekends. Not that I get them in my line of work, but sometimes I need the time off. And that's because there's too much football. So the oversaturation devalues people's interest in it. Okay. Interest will decline if it's oversaturated. That's the same with everything. But on top of that, you're impacting the quality of the matches. And that for me is the biggest crime. FIFA sit there telling everybody that, no, it's for the good of the game, blah, blah, blah. If we get more money in, we can help different sort of federations and different, organizations grow, and we can filter the money down, and it can, be given to grassroots level and all the rest of it. No. You're doing it because you earn more money out of it. You do it because there's a machine there that churns out cash, and that's all you are interested in. If you were interested in the quality of football, you wouldn't want games every 3 days, because what you get with games every 3 days is heavy rotation, which means a lot of the time some of the best players are not on display, are not on show. Now, imagine, back in the day of peak Lionel Messi, imagine you turned up to the Camp Nou. Let's say that you traveled from abroad to go and watch Barcelona at the Camp Nou, and you turned up and the team news came out and you found that Lionel Messi was not in the team, was left out, was on the substitutes bench because he played a game 3 days ago and he's got another game to play 2 days later. That would be heartbreaking for that fan, for that supporter. It's like when people come and see Arsenal, right? If Mikel Arteta was to start rotating as heavily as I think at times he should, and we'll go back to that point about sort of managing players at a later date. But imagine you came all the way from America, and I know a lot of you do, And Bukayo Saka weren't playing. Neither was Declan Rice, nor was William Saliba, because they needed to be rested. They needed to have a break. They needed to be protected. So not only are you impacting people's interest levels by oversaturating the sport, by putting on too many games, too many competitions, devaluing competitions because there's so many others at play and all the rest of it, but you're also impacting the quality of your product. Either players are rotated out, therefore they're not participating, which impacts the interest of certain people, because a lot of people turn up to watch teams, but also to watch specific players. Then factor in, that there'll be players missing because they've got injuries, because they've got problems. That's not what you want. That's not what you want. That's not what you want at all. Just a comment from Ed about the camera. I know the camera's stuttering a little bit. It's not the camera. It's because my laptop is doing some form of stupid update in the middle of us live streaming, which I can't stop now without restarting the laptop. So I don't want to do that. I think it's calmed down a little bit now, but it's not the camera. It's that the laptop just started doing something while we were mid-stream. So apologies if the video quality's impacted. I think it's calmed down a little bit now. You can let me know in the live chat. But yeah, that's what it is. Normally it's fine. I'm just having a little bit of an issue with the laptop. But anyway, so yeah, you're impacting the quality, you're impacting people's interest levels, and that's where we are right now, and that's why I'm not happy with the way that football's going, really, in a lot of ways. And somebody said this to me the other day, right? So obviously, I work as a football commentator, and the more games there are, the more work there is for us. The more, the more games are on television, the more opportunities there are for people like me. And that is true. Like, I've got way more work this season because of Sky's broadcast deal with the EFL, where they put all the games on Sky Sports Plus, or a large chunk of the games on Sky Sports Plus. I've got bookings and gigs that I would never have got if this oversaturation of football hadn't happened. So it does benefit me in a lot of ways, yet I'm still here telling you that I think it's gone too far, which shows you how strongly I feel about it. And that's the sort of reality of this situation. And to circle it back and link it back to Arsenal again, Mikel Arteta said that the Kai Havertz injury was an accident waiting to happen. And did he, in my opinion, play a part in that by opting to go with Kai Havertz, even at times where there was scope for rotation, at times where there was an opportunity to play someone else? Maybe. I guess we'll never know, right? But if it didn't happen the other week, it would have happened next week, or the week after that, or the week after that, because we are putting too much strain on these footballers. And people often throw back that sort of point of, yeah, but look how much money they're getting paid. I don't give a shit how much money they're getting paid. That doesn't turn them bionic, does it? The fact that you are very wealthy does not make your muscles sort of immune to the damage that you can suffer when you don't rest, when you don't have adequate time to recover. And yes, sports science is better than it's ever been, and there are lots of techniques employed nowadays to try and get these players as recovered as quickly as possible. But at the end of the day, being wealthy does not make you bionic. And if you're not bionic and you're human like everybody else, you will break down. You will break down, as he put it. I think that's a much more concise way of putting it. Money doesn't heal injuries. Exactly. It doesn't. Let's turn our attention to what happened in the Premier League outside of the Arsenal this weekend. Some games that impacted Arsenal. We'll have a little chat about those right after this. Okay, let's start off by discussing Liverpool's victory over Wolverhampton Wanderers. Luis Diaz broke the deadlock for Liverpool after just 15 minutes, which was I should say, probably the ugliest goal you'll ever see in terms of it just looked so bad on Wolves' part, didn't it? It just looked like a calamity. The way it happened, the way they got in, the way that Diaz sort of bundled it past the goalkeeper, etc., etc. And then on 37 minutes, Mo Salah doubles their lead to make it 2-0. And I got to say, at this point, I started to lose interest in this game. I really, really did. I thought to myself, what's the point? Liverpool are going to get all 3 points. They're going to restore their 7-point lead at the top. Never, ever really saw Wolves at home as a potential banana skin game. I look at their games coming up on Wednesday away at Villa. And then I look at their game coming up against Manchester City next weekend. And I think if we're going to make up further ground, it's got to happen this week. Like, it's got to happen this week. We really, really need them to drop points. If they could drop even just 2 points, right, across the 2 games, and we can take advantage and reduce that gap to 5 points, then that really is something, I think. If they could drop 3 points, if they could lose one of those games and we could reduce it to 4 points, that would be really, really positive. And that would give me a lot of encouragement going into the final sort of stretch. Now, I don't believe that it's going to be, solely dependent on what Liverpool do, because I still got reservations and question marks around whether or not in our current state, with all the problems that we currently have, we're good enough to take advantage of any slip-ups. But hey, we're in there and we want to be there if indeed they end up dropping the ball. So you look at fixtures like this one coming up on Wednesday, Aston Villa away, tough old game. You look at Manchester City away at the weekend as well. That is also a really, really tough game. I say it's really a tough game. You never really know what you're going to get with Manchester City these days. And they've got Real Madrid in midweek, which isn't ideal. But then again, Liverpool have got Villa away in midweek. So you hope, that game has the potential, doesn't it? The City away one to be really, really difficult. So fingers crossed that is the case. A couple of points to just quickly touch on from the Liverpool game. Did I feel like they felt the nerves? I do. I think that the nerves are starting to just kick in a little bit. Not just on the pitch, but off the pitch as well. We saw Arne Slot sort of lose it a little bit after the Merseyside derby the other night. And then you just kind of gauge the atmosphere inside Anfield when Wolves pulled the goal back through Matheus Cunha. What a goal that was, by the way. And you just felt that, they were a little bit nervy, a little bit shaky at the end, which just shows some cracks. It doesn't mean that those cracks are going to develop into anything more than that. So I'm not getting carried away, that's for sure. But you just got that sense, didn't you? You got that feeling. Liverpool probably look at it through a totally different lens and say, yep, we struggled a little bit. It didn't go as we'd have liked, but we managed to find a way. And because we found a way, rather than sort of worry about how tight and close it was in the end, instead, we're going to take confidence from that. It's a classic case of looking at one scenario from 2 different viewpoints, right? And I think that will certainly be the way that Arne Slot's dressing it up. But there were a couple of decisions in the game as well that I thought were very, very lucky on sort of Liverpool's part, where they got away with it. Could Konate have got a second yellow? I think he absolutely could have. They had a second penalty awarded to them by the on-field referee in the second half. It was overturned, though, by the VAR because Jota basically dived. Let's be honest. He recognized that the challenge was coming in. He made an obvious attempt to engineer contact, and then he goes down. The penalty's awarded, and thankfully VAR's in play because they step in and they overturn it. What I found really, really frustrating, even forget the Konate thing, even that, obviously debatable, whatever. I'm not in the business of drawing up conspiracy theories unless they're to do with us, of course. But I just think, why was Jota not booked for diving? Like, it was a clear and obvious dive. Like, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I misread what VAR can and can't do. Do I not understand it? Am I failing to kind of grasp the concept of it? I don't really know. But why on earth wasn't Jota booked would be my question. Why hasn't the referee gone over and had a look at that and said, no penalty? And Jota, you're getting a yellow card because that is clearly a dive. So, yeah, there was a bit of frustration there. Again, I'm not going to sort of go on about conspiracy theories and stuff. I thought Liverpool were probably a little bit unlucky with some of the decisions that went against them in the Merseyside derby. I'm also not going to sit here and pretend that it evens itself out over the course of the year, because it doesn't, as we've found out, for the majority of this season so far. But anyway, let's move on to another game that took place at the weekend. This was just a fucking dreadful game of football. Tottenham won, Manchester United 0. Excuse my French. 2 sides that are just all over the shop. Spurs won, but looked incredibly vulnerable, even against a really, really poor Manchester United attack. If Garnacho had worn his shooting boots, and Postecoglou wouldn't have been making wisecracks about sympathy cards from other managers or whatever the hell he was bleating on about post-match. It was just a really rubbish game of football, but it was quite gripping at the same time, if that makes sense. Like when you can see the quality's low, but it's entertaining. That's exactly what we got. Maddison put Spurs in front after 13 minutes. I don't know if he was responding to Roy Keane's comments that came out about him. If he was, scoring a tap-in from 2 yards out against the worst Man United side in my lifetime, it's not exactly something that says, get lost, haters. Like it doesn't really come across that powerfully, I don't think. But James Maddison obviously enjoyed the moment. But anyway, really dire game of football in terms of the quality, but I thought actually quite entertaining. Ange Postecoglou is very abrasive, I find. Don't like the way he does his press conferences. Don't like the way he's always on the attack when he's getting asked very, very reasonable questions. This is a Tottenham side, guys, that are 12th in the league. They're 4 points behind Brentford. They are, 14 points, 13 points behind Bournemouth. 17 points behind Nottingham Forest. It is absolutely fair to ask tough questions of Ange Postecoglou, yet he hates it and seems to respond in this really rude and abrupt way time and time again. And I actually don't think that helps him. Like, don't get me wrong, he's the Spurs manager. I obviously don't want him to do well. But when you think that if you just applied a bit of common sense, if you just were a little bit smarter in the way that you came across, then actually maybe the general consensus would be a little bit more sympathetic towards you rather than what it is now, which I think is people queuing up, waiting to stick the boot in. That is as a consequence of his conduct with the media, if you like. That's what I think anyway. I think you can manage media to a certain point, of course, if you are smart, and I think that's missing from Ange Postecoglou's locker. I know he wants to be honest and he wants to be everyone's mate and all the rest of it, but to me, that's the bit that he's getting horribly wrong at the moment, and it's not helping him in terms of the coverage that's around him. But again, when I'm talking about this game, yes, it was a stinker. Yes, it was rubbish. Both teams had a lot of players missing though, and I'm not looking to use that as an excuse for any of them to kind of get off scot-free from what was a dreadful contest. But it goes back to the point I was talking about a little bit earlier on when we're talking about too many injuries, too much football, and that once you get yourself in a hole with injuries and they start to pile up, it can be very, very difficult to recover from. Spurs have been dealing with that stuff for a long, long time. Manchester United seem to have had the week from hell, players dropping left, right, and centre. And Ruben Amorim, as a result, had nothing on the bench. Just on Ruben Amorim, really quickly, I've had my little moan about Ange Postecoglou. When it comes to Ruben Amorim, I'm interested to know where people are at on him. Get involved in the live comments. I'd love to hear from you. Because there's a part of me that says he's inherited a shit show at Manchester United. And for that reason, he deserves time. And he deserves to get to the end of the season without any really serious questions being asked. I think Man United fans will be well within their rights to question some of the performances, some of the setups, and whether or not he's doing the maximum to make them competitive. But the flip side of that is that if he's really desperate in terms of trying to implement some values and he starts drifting away from those values in an attempt to make them more competitive in the interim, in the long term, that will cause him a problem. And in the long term, that will put his position, that will make his position, I should say, a weaker one. So I do feel a bit like sorry for him in that sense, because he's inherited a load of rubbish. But I also think that he's got a responsibility as Manchester United boss to help, to try and prop up the team, to do things and to compromise a little bit on his side to get them being more competitive. And there were moments where they looked okay yesterday. I thought Xerxes had an okay game at times. Some of the dribbles, some of the early passes forward. Garnacho's finishing was horrendous. But for that, maybe they win the game. Who knows? But I just feel like they've become less competitive under Ruben Amorim when they should be at least better set up and better drilled to be able to compete. At the same time, right, we're saying all of that, but the owners have, as was put in the chat, done him dirty. His squad today is weaker than the squad that he went into the window with. Okay, Dorgu came in, but he's lost Marcus Rashford. And it looks like when you read what is coming out about Manchester United at the moment, that he's not going to have much joy in terms of trying to change it up come the summer as well, unless they start selling players on, which again weakens you versus trying to strengthen by bringing people in. So yeah, it's a horrible situation that he's inherited there, and it's going to be interesting to see A, if he can last, and B, if he does, how exactly he's going to go about turning it around. Right, short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about our main story, a report coming out of Spain that I'm sure has given Arsenal fans some hope around a particular striker that, let's say, is very high up on most people's want list. Okay, so according to Sport in Spain, Newcastle would be willing to let Alexander Isak leave for £83.3 million, the equivalent of 100 million in euros this summer, if they fail to qualify for the Champions League, with Barcelona, Liverpool, Arsenal, and Chelsea among those keen on the 25-year-old Sweden striker. So let's break this down, right? Where's the report coming from? Sport, Barcelona's mouthpiece of a newspaper. That's what it is. And so for that reason, you have to take this with a pinch of salt, I think. Barcelona are a club that, even if Alexander Isak was available for that sort of money, I don't think could do it right now without moving people on because of their financial situation. So that kind of makes me think, well, why would they put this story out then just for the sake of it? But by that same token, the press in Italy and in Spain, and this is obviously Spain in this example, Catalonia, I think sometimes they do jump the gun and sometimes they do get a little bit ahead of themselves. 100 million euros will be great value for a player of this caliber. But I think the bit that makes the most sense in this, and look, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that this is solid and that because this report has come out, I am now incredibly confident that Arsenal for £83.3 million could get Alexander Isak. But where I kind of agree and where I kind of do sort of subscribe to this idea a little bit is around Newcastle's season, what remains of it, and how that could impact his want to stay there. Because if they go and win the Carabao Cup, right, that's a trophy. That'll be Newcastle's first trophy in 50 plus years, which would be amazing. What a moment that would be at Newcastle Football Club. And he'd be a hero for life if he was to fire them to that trophy. Then you got to think about what they do in the Champions League qualification sort of stakes. And if we just have a quick glance at the Premier League table now, Newcastle is 7th, but they're only 2 points behind Bournemouth, who occupy 5th. And it looks like 5th place this season is going to be a Champions League spot. So I think it's really, really important what happens between now and the end of the season in terms of shaping what the situation with Alexander Isak looks like come the summer. If Newcastle miss out on the Champions League, that is massive, huge, because there's going to come a point, if you're as good as Alexander Isak, where you just don't want to be outside of the Champions League. You don't want to be not participating in Europe's premier competition. You're too good. You should be. In fact, you should be starring in it. To stick around at a club that are not even in it would cause, I think, some frustration on the player's part. It's only natural that he gets to that point, given that his form over the last couple of seasons has been as incredible as it is. If they win a trophy, in a weird way, I look at it and think, well, if they lose the final, that might do us a bit of a favor. But at the same time, I think actually, if he was to win a trophy, but then they failed to qualify for the Champions League, Alexander Isak would probably be able to leave Newcastle then, drawing a quite nice line under his time there. Look, it's been amazing. I've come to the Premier League. I've sort of grasped what being a Premier League player is all about. I've performed. I've delivered you your first trophy in God knows how long. But now is a great time for me to sign off and say goodbye. Like that could be how it plays out as well. Do I think Newcastle accept a bid of £83.3 million? No. I think you're probably going to have to go 100 million, maybe north of that in pounds, not euros, to get this deal done. But the more Alexander Isak wants it, the easier it's going to be for us to negotiate. Because if he's pushing from his side and he's adamant that Newcastle won't price him out of a move, then it starts to become a kind of two-way push. It's like two people pushing from each side, and you get stuck in the middle. If you're Newcastle United, you've got the player applying pressure. You start to ask questions about how committed he's going to be. You start to ask questions about, you know, what his value is going to look like if his form declines as a result of that. Obviously, Newcastle's PSR issues mean that in order to continue progressing the squad, they're probably going to have to let one of the big boys go. It might not be Alexander Isak. It could be Bruno Guimaraes, for instance, right? But I think them failing to meet their objectives on the pitch will kind of fuel a narrative in Alexander Isak's mind that starts to then question whether Newcastle is really the place for him, whether this was just a good step and he needs to go one step further in order to be competitive for the game's biggest trophies, to play, as I say, in Europe's premier competition. I think what happens between now and the end of the season is massive in terms of how possible or impossible it is for us to get Alexander Isak. I still personally think that we'll probably get Benjamin Sesko come the summer, because I think that that's a much easier deal to do. But Alexander Isak, for me, is the one. He's the guy that you should go and break the bank for. And for that reason, when I read reports like this, I do get a little bit giddy. I do get a little bit excited. Now, again, let me be clear. This is coming out of Sport, a Barcelona-based publication that, I've not got the greatest record in the past, if we're being completely honest. I don't want to get people's hopes up. But just reading this morning, when I sort of went through the gossip page, it did catch my eye. It did make me sort of sit up a little bit straighter in my chair and sip my coffee a little bit more intensely as I was sort of reading through the report. We'll see. But also the other factor is that if Newcastle do sort of change their stance and say, you know what, we're happy to sell Alexander Isak, but this is our price, we're not the only club that will be in there for him. I can tell you that. Chelsea, I think, will be in there for him. They can spend a lot of money, as we've seen. They've got no qualms about doing that. And obviously they probably will also, like us, need a centre forward come the summer. Liverpool, if they go on and become Premier League champions this season and, continue to show what they have under Arne Slot, becomes a really attractive proposition as well. Arguably a more attractive one than Arsenal, because Liverpool will have shown that they can win. And we're still at that point where we're trying to win. We're trying to get over the line, etc., etc. I heard a lot of Arsenal fans. In fact, I heard one particular Arsenal fan ring up on TalkSport the other day and insist that Alexander Isak wanted Arsenal above everybody else because he wants to wear the 14 shirt. The 14 shirt that Thierry Henry wore. Theo Walcott wore it as well. Like, it, with all due respect to him, I don't think that really comes into the players thinking. It'd be a nice little quirk if he was to join, and something that I'm sure he'd asked for and try and make happen. But I don't think it's the be all and end all. But yeah, look, Isak's future is up in the air. And it will be up in the air until he's, I would imagine, sure of where Newcastle are headed, and if Newcastle are able to kind of match his own ambitions. Because at some point, you can love a club, you can have all the affection of the supporters, you can feel really engaged and really happy, but at some point you need the relationship to be one that's two-way. And Alexander Isak is giving Newcastle absolutely everything at the moment. But are Newcastle absolutely giving him everything in terms of being as competitive as they should be, to make sure that he fulfills what he wants over the course of what remains of his career? But look, we'll have to wait and see. But interesting that Sport have gone as far as naming a price. £83.3 million, apparently. That would be an absolute steal, wouldn't it? Somehow I don't think it's going to get done that cheap. But interesting that there is a lot of noise around Isak's future, even now, even so many months out from the next transfer window. Because look, I'm not saying it unsettles him. That would be me sort of questioning his professionalism to a point. But it does have the potential to. It does have the potential to subconsciously become a thing for Alexander Isak over what remains of the season. So we'll have to wait and see how that develops. Massive thank you to every single one of you for tuning in on today's episode. It is a short one. It is a brief one. I've been running around with the family today. It is half term, which actually I didn't realize until Sunday. A friend of mine told me it was half term on Sunday. Obviously, half term started on Monday today. So I've only had 24 hours notice of half term. It completely passed me by. I had no idea. Shows how across it all. I am. But it just, it caught me off guard, which means half term, you have to occupy the kids, take them out, take them here, take them there, take them everywhere. And they ask for stuff all the time as well, which doesn't normally happen. So half term is a bit of a drain, but don't worry, we'll continue to bring you as many episodes as possible. And I suppose it's nice to spend some time with the little ones as well. I don't get to do enough of that because of how the schedule sort of looks over the course of the season. Going back to that thing I was moaning about earlier, too much bloody football. But we'll continue to plug on. We'll continue to get through it. Thank you again, as always, for joining us. Leave us a review if you're listening on audio. Leave us a subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube. Oh, yeah, the Juventus pillow. Goon Gang just mentioned it. The Juventus pillow goes in the closet for streams, Harry. No, mate, I'm a massive Serie A lover. I've got a few of these. I've got a Juve one, a Milan one. Then I've got a Napoli one as well. Someone who makes them very kindly gifted them to me, and they're fantastic. So maybe you're going to see more of them appearing on the sofa behind me. But anyway, just very, very quickly on Juventus before I go. Did anyone watch the Derby d'Italia last night? It was fantastic. Really gripping, enjoyable game. Juve beat Inter by a goal to nil. Randall Kolo Muani didn't score, but played a massive part in Conceição's winning goal just by being really bloody chaotic in the penalty area. And I looked at that and I thought, maybe, just maybe, he might have been a decent fit for us. Now, I wasn't that big on it when the links were coming out earlier in the transfer window because A, I didn't think it was likely or possible, but B, because I've never really been sure about Kolo Muani, but I watched him for 90 minutes and I saw a guy that works incredibly hard, that works tirelessly and isn't afraid of just causing a bit of chaos in the box, which is ultimately what led to Conceição's goal. So he's having a great time in the Serie A. 4 appearances so far. He's got 5 goals and 1 assist, 6 goal contributions in just 4 appearances, which is pretty good going, isn't it? And he managed a couple of goals in 10 in Ligue 1 before moving over to Italy on loan. So just wanted to get that Kolo Muani chat in there. Thanks for reminding me about last night's game. I'll catch you all soon. Until the next one, take care of yourselves and have a wonderful Monday. Goodbye.